any other world will do. Chapter 2. By the next day, Miles Townsend had tired of salt air and of sand working its way into the cracks in his ass, and itched instead for city lights and people. The trains had started running again the night before, as Verkrum said they would. And Miles thought about Barcelona. He didn't know anyone in Madrid. He'd only chosen it in the first place because it was the first city in Spain he could think of. But maybe not knowing anyone there was a good thing. He'd spent 6 weeks traveling around Ireland and France without getting too close to anyone, and part of him clung to the freedom of it. Yet something drew Miles to Verkrum. Despite the crush he suspected Verkrum had on him, he was easy to confide in. Maybe it was simply the fact that he'd shown an interest in Miles, or that he managed to listen without judgment. Whatever the case, he had a way of making Miles feel like less of an idiot. So that evening, after a short train ride down the coast and a long walk soaking up the charms of the Ramblas, which included dead-eyed middle-aged prostitutes loitering down by the harbor and the legion of drug dealers who brushed past him every few seconds with offers of hash coke speed, Miles found himself in the bar of the Hotel Kashmir, made of idiotic by love. He had fallen in love with the bartender. She was an older woman, at least 22 or 23, tall but not too tall, that is, not taller than him, lithe and graceful, with dreadlocks that just brushed her eyelids. It wasn't merely that she was pretty. Miles preferred to think he wasn't that superficial, but she was quick to smile, had an easy laugh, and a kind way of regarding people she talked to. He devised he had better calm down, find out her name, perhaps speak to her. She might turn out to be a moron. Miles made his way across the small crowded bar, a narrow gallery of all the common room, and overheard her conversation in English, Spanish, and German with various patrons. The thought that she was probably out of his league now occurred to Miles, but he managed to squeeze in at the bar and catch her eye. She leaned across the bar to hear him over the dim. "Hi," he said. "I'm looking for a man named Verkrum. He said I might find him here. Do you know him?" "Oh, I know him," she said, her smile revealing faint dimples on her cheeks. "He's my flatmate." "Oh. I haven't seen him since this morning, but he's probably not far." She spoke with a slight, hard-to-place accent. "How do you know Verkrum?" she asked. "I met him on the train coming down from Paris," he said, and she nodded, picking up empties as he went on. "We ended up talking over a few drinks in the bar car. I told him I was going to go to Madrid, but he said I should come to Barcelona, so I did." "Let me guess," she said, leaning a hand on the bar. "You poured out your life story while he just sat there, chain-smoking and nodding his head." Yeah, pretty much," he said, laughing. "How do you know that?" "It's his M.O., she said. "I'm Anna, by the way." "Miles," he said, and shook her hand across the bar, the touch of her hand sending a tingle up his arm. "His M.O.? Modus operandi." "Ah," he said, pretending that helped. "Verkrum doesn't always tell me where he's going," she said, "but he tends to stay in town for at least a few days after returning from one of his excursions, also part of his M.O. Miles nodded. "Isn't an M.O. something a criminal has?" "It is," she said, "but Verkrum's crimes are, well, showing up late for drinks, making inappropriate small talk with strangers, attracting lack of awareness, that sort of thing." The man on the stool next to Miles, hearing the conversation, turned and squinted at Miles, unsure if they'd already met. With a shaggy mustache and a goatee and prominent canines that flashed whenever he smiled, he had slightly wolfish appearance. "He just got in," Anna explained. "He's looking for Verkrum. Have you seen him?" "I saw him down in the Placa a couple hours ago," the man said. "I didn't ask where he was headed, though." Then, extending a hand to Miles, "I'm Tom." Miles introduced himself, and they shook hands as Tom downed the remains of his wine. "You staying here?" he asked. Miles nodded. Tom asked the two young women sitting on the other side of him if they'd seen Verkrum, but they both shook their heads. "Per you a beer?" asked Anna. "Yes, please." Anna drew Miles a pint of beer from the tap and refilled Tom's glass from the giant box of red wine behind her. It was a no-frills bar, no rows of liquor bottles lining the wall, no array of tap handles emblazoned with colorful logos, no bowls filled with nuts or wedges of lime. Just one generic beer on draft and your choice of red or white wine. Still, it was a popular spot and was soon standing room only. So Tom suggested they take their drinks and head to the common room to find a table. Miles would have liked to talk to Anna more, but she was now swamped by customers anyway, so he followed Tom and the two young women out. The Hotel Kashmir common room looked down onto Placa Real, through large half-moon windows that echoed the arcades ringing the square. Cracked open, they let in snatches of conversation from the people gathering around the fountain below, as well as the odors of roasting meat and smoldering hashin. The hotel was in fact just a rather grungy hotel, without any of the customary youth hostels rules intended to maintain an aura of wholesomeness. It attracted a certain kind of young backpacker as well as quite a few older travelers, and transitions in needs of a bed and hot shower for 300 peasants, or about $2 a night. Its three-word description in Miles' guidebook had read simply, "Watch your things." The Kashmir guests, along with a few stray cats, were gathered around the long wooden tables and benches of the common area, talking and drinking, or cleaning themselves according to their wont. Tom, Miles learned, was a New Zealander teaching English at the Escuela de Lengua and had been in Barcelona for nearly a month. He seemed to know most everyone in Kashmir and introduced Miles to more of the regulars, as he called them, despite the fact they were all just passing through. Chrissy and Tawny, the two who had been sitting with Tom, were on holiday from university in Brisbane and had arrived in Barcelona a few days earlier. Tawny, the taller and thinner of the two, was very blonde, tan, and pretty. Chrissy, shorter, sturdier, some freckled, and sandy-haired, was not unattractive, just similar enough to her friend. It seemed to Miles that she didn't beneath from the comparison. Tawny was quieter, more aloft, whereas Chrissy was more forward, quicker to laugh, quicker to take the piss out of someone. "Tom, what the hell does that mean?" she asked him, pointing at the red circle A symbol sewn onto the sleeve of his army surplus jacket. "It means I'm an antichrist," he said. "You're an antichrist?" she said. "Crikey, I thought there was only the one." "An anarchist, not the antichrist," he said, smiling. "I mean, I'd hardly advertise it if I were." "I would," said Tawny, as if this were obvious, which made Chrissy laugh. Miles met a few other regulars. They all knew Verkran and seemed to regard him with a mixture of affection and curiosity. He was a figure of some mystery, it turned out, as nobody really knew what he did. Someone said he had been in academia once, but he seemed to be on permanent sabbatical. He'd just shown up one day at the Kashmir with his leather satchel and was now a fixture, a real regular. Then a large blonde head appeared, supporting by a 6'4" frame, broad shoulders, and the noble, neatly chiseled feature of an Arkan Ubermish. The large head and body, Miles learned, belonged to a Dane named Anders. Tawny perceptibly strained when Anders sat down, unconsciously thrusting her chest out and blinking at him. He didn't seem to notice, but his ears pricked up at the mention of Miles' connection to Verkran. Miles told him about parting company after the short-lived rail strike. "Ah, labor workers," said Anders, "the bane of these Mediterranean countries. There's a definite disdain for authority here. I suppose it's part of what attracts people like us." As Anders was dry and the glasses around the table nearly empty, he offered to buy a round, and Miles offered to help carry. Standing up next to Anders, he felt the contrast. Despite being just over 6 feet tall, Miles had yet to fill out his frame and compared to Anders looked like a sapling whose limbs might snap in a strong wind. Miles also had that distinctly adolescent combination of not enough meat on his bones and baby fat. Anders rubbed a hand over his square jaw, thick with many stubble, and looked Miles over as they fell in step and walked towards the bar. "Have you met Verkran's roommate Anna?" said Miles. "I think so," said Anders. "She seems nice," said Miles. "Pretty too. I hadn't noticed." When they got to the bar, Anders continued around and behind the ducking in beside Anna and greeting her with a prolonged open-mouthed kiss, pulling her body against his. Anna leaned her head back and laughed, her hands pushing gently on his broad chest. Hola, she said, and Miles looked for a trapdoor he could jump into. As Anna filled 2 pitchers with beer, Anders asked her, So you don't know where Verkran is either? He's not in the apartment? Anna shook her head no. You know Verkran, he comes and goes like a stray cat. The sweaty metal pitchers filled. Miles reached for one, but Anders simply wrapped his meat hooks around their middles and hoisted them both. He gave Anna a peck on the cheek and proceeded towards the common room. With a backward glance and a wistful bye, Miles followed him all. After another round of drinks and still no sign of Verkran, Chrissy, Tom, and the others adopted Miles' mission of finding Verkran as their own and determined that they should head out to search for him. Miles, recalling the reason he'd come to Barcelona in the first place, said, Where should we go? Wherever the 4 winds take us, Miles, said Christy. Probably a bar. They headed out, losing Anders in the process, who said he'd meet them later on, and made their way down to the Placa. From the square they've moved into one of the narrow alleys of Barcelona's Gothic quarters, the Barri Gothic, which had sprung up around the 14th century cathedral, the Basilica before it, and the Roman Forum before that. They wound their way through the crooked lanes of the medieval labyrinth, ending up at the bar Verkran haunted. Though not this night. It was quiet as a church in there, and they lasted no longer than it took down 1 drink before they found themselves dancing in the Suburban de Cotisque back near the Placa Nerina. Tom managed to wrangle a bottle of Epstein's at the bar and proceeded to drink most of it, which would turn out to be the second worst idea he had that night. In a couple of hours, they were back on the street looking for a place to eat, having failed so far in their quest to find Verkran. They did find Anders lurking alone down a side alley where they ran into him and dragged him along to a late supper. At the restaurant, Miles ate and drank and chatted with Tom and Mary, a college student from North Carolina. Across the table, Anders sat next to Thani while Christy was deep in conversation with a couple of girls from Yugoslavia, both named Ketra. They were all at least a few years older than Miles, and at one point, Anders narrowed his eyes at Miles and asked him, So, did you get separated from your school field trip or something? Said Miles. Slow to take Anders' meaning. I'm between schools at the moment, actually. How old are you? 18, he said. That's young, said Mary, who was in her early 20s. You don't look nearly that old, said Anders. In spite of Anders, Miles felt strangely at home among Verkran's friends. The feeling extended to the others in the room, including a group of college students at the next table who were seeing off a friend that night and trying, with Tom's help, to remember the words to a familiar Irish blessing. May the road rise up to greet you, said one, raising his glass. Meet ya, not greet ya, said Tom. Ah, right, and may the sun always be always at your back. Sun's on my face, said the man whose last night it was. Wind's at my back. Wind blows out your arse, said another. Close enough. And they drank to his health. One of the group told Tom about an after-hours get-together at some student's apartment near the Placa de Trippi, and that was all the persuasion it took to move them in the direction that prolonged the festivities after the check arrived. Maybe they'd run into Verkran there. The apartment was only a few minutes' walk away, down a side street that looked narrow enough for you to reach out and touch the buildings on both sides. The flat was on the 2nd floor, and people had spilled out the door onto the landing and down the stairs. Some unholy fusion of jazz and world music wafted around the room, receding into the background and filling the gaps in conversation. The apartment itself was small, a narrow main room with whitewashed walls and a high wood beam ceiling, a kitchen at one end and open French doors leading to a wrought iron balcony on the other side. Guests crowded onto and around the large L-shaped sofa that dominated the living area, and open bottles of wine covered the small kitchen table. Tom grabbed one of the fuller bottles and, red by the neck and not finding any glasses handy, took a swing and offered it to Miles with an apologetic shrug. So how'd ya like Barcelona your first night, huh? Asked Tom, his accent thickening as his blood alcohol's level rose. I like it, said Miles. It is always like this? Well, it is the weekend. Actually, it's Thursday, Miles pointed out. Tom flashed his lupine grin. Close enough, he said with a shrug, adding with a nod to the balcony. I think I'm gonna grab some fresh air. Chrissy and Mary wandered over and Miles offered them the bottle. Mary took a short swing, then wiped a dribble of red wine off her chin with the back of her hand. She handed the bottle to Chrissy, who eyed it suspiciously. Ah, well, when in Rome, she said with a chuckle and finished it off. Anders was leaning against the kitchen counter talking to the two Kathias, while Tawny sat on the arm of the sofa listening to a good-looking, dark-haired young man make his case. Looks like Tawny's made a new friend, said Miles. Yeah, she has to practically beat them off, said Christy, who blushed when Miles laughed at the unintentional innuendo. You know what I mean. When Miles looked up again, Tawny had ditched the guy who'd been chatting her up and was now in the kitchen talking to Anders. Tawny seemed a more obvious match for that overgrown Viking than as someone as interesting as Anna. Anders was the only guy in the place taller than she was, for one thing, and her face lit up whenever he looked at her. From time to time, Tawny would wet her lips or tilt her head in a rapt fascination while Anders spoke. It was like watching a bamboo display its ass. He wondered how immune to temptation Anders really could be. I'm gonna see if there's anything else to drink, Miles said to Christy as he headed over to the collection of bottles on the kitchen counter. He smiled at Ketra and Ketra and pretended to test bottles for fullness as he tried to listen to Anders and Thawny's conversation. Somehow they found glasses and were drinking some kind of booze. Thawny laughed at something Anders said and he finished his drink and excused himself to use the facilities. Miles casually sidled over a mostly empty bottle of white wine in his hand. Where'd you find that? He said, motioning towards her glass. Dunno, Anders found it, she said. Scotch, he said. Quite nasty, but it does the trick. Anders seems nice, he said, hoping he sounded like he meant it. Quite nice, she said, but spoken for. Miles knitted his brow, as if he didn't know that. With Anna, the barmaid. Oh, said Miles, I thought they were broken up. Who told you that? I'm pretty sure Verkran had said that, he lied. How does he know? She asked, skeptical. Well, he's her roommate, isn't he? He said. Thawny turned her head in the direction Anders had gone. She turned back to Miles and raised her eyebrows. Food for thought, that. Miles said and nonchalantly swallowed the remains of the bottle, which included a cigarette butt, causing him to double over in an unproductive hacking fit. His eyes watering as Thawny looked on his bored distance. Well, he managed to finally gasp. Nature calls. With that, he headed out to the kitchen, passing Anders on the way with a queasy smirk, and found the bathroom, a small closet under some stairs where a commode and sink were crammed. In the mirror above the sink, his reflection caught him in its glassy stare. If someone had asked him why he told that pathetic lie, he couldn't have told them. So he wondered why he did, and he wondered why it was that drunken encounter with bathroom mirrors always forced him to question his life choices. When Miles emerged from the loo, there was an excited commotion coming from the other end of the flat. Tom had climbed atop the balcony's iron railing, one hand holding onto the edge of the balcony above, the other pointing across the street. I know a balcony, Miles heard Tom say. I was in a flat this week. Miles could hear another voice alternately pleading with him not to or edging him on to go ahead and do it. It's only 6 feet away, Tom was reasoning as only a drunk can. It's lower down, see? There's plenty of room to land. I'm not gonna break the glass. Miles struggled his way through the crowd, now gathering around the open French doors to the balcony. He called out, Tom, what the hell are you doing? Was that? Tom called back, scanning the expectant faces below. Me, Miles. He raised a hand and caught Tom's eye. Ah, cheers, Miles. I really don't think this is a good idea, said Miles. You don't think I can jump that? A few people parted to let Miles through. He looked across the street to the other balcony. It really wasn't that far, about 7 or 8 feet away, straight across a couple of feet down. You could probably make it 3 out of 4 times, said Miles. Right on, mate, said Tom. It's that 4th time that worries me. I'm only gonna do it once. Miles wasn't doing a very good job of discouraging him. He realized he could hear Chrissy from back in the apartment call, Oi, is that you, Tom? Get down off there, you Kiwi bastard. Miles tried a different track. How will you get back? You're gonna break into their apartment after you make it over? Tom scoffed, then hesitated, considered. I can see your point. Well, it was certainly double in theory, where it would have been after the amount of beer, wine, and Epstein Tom had consumed that night. Not factoring in the force of his weight landing on the other balcony, nor the question of where he'd go crashing through the French doors, or bounce off them, or what he would do once he got there, would never remain moot because as Tom was weighing his options, one of the students who lived in the flat came out of the stairwell, through the front door, saw where he was, and screamed, causing Tom to jerk his head around, lose his grip on the upper ledge, and fall over the railing straight down to the pavement below. Miles rushed towards Tom and the iron railing too late. He looked over the side. Sure enough, gravity worked the same here as it did everywhere else. Tom's form was inelegantly sprawled on the stones below, where the road had risen up to meet him. End of chapter 2.